All right, everyone, welcome back into another props video, touching on the top prop bets here in week 5. Now, real quickly, I just want to call out that just be making sure to be paying attention to all the props videos that I put out there. This was one of them that I kind of slightly touched on in other videos, and I wanted to call that out because that was a huge edge gained with Sam Howell there, and then also with David Montgomery. Now, those two I kind of touched on in passing because I figured they would be bumped by the time most people got to them. But there was also this one that I called out to people as well. I'm like, this seems like a prop that is going to get bumped and probably bumped by a significant amount. And sure enough, we can see that that already did get bumped a pretty decent amount there. And those are all just kind of using your knowledge prior to really the Vegas prop lines coming out. And so it's just a way to jump ahead of PrizePicks. And I want to start out with a couple that I feel are going to be big edges for us and probably lines that will get bumped throughout the week as well. Now, I've nailed a bunch of these over the past couple of weeks, and it seems like literally the best bets, the ones that get bumped up or even get taken away off the board, have been the ones that have rooting a 5 out of 6 or rooting a 4 out of 5 slip. Josh Palmer, a good example of that last week. Now, I want to start out with the Green Bay Packers props that we are getting because I think personally that these are going to be good props, not only on PrizePicks and Underdog, but also on the sportsbooks. They are props that I expect to get bumped. Okay, so sure, you could do Jordan Love rush yards at 10.5. That number definitely seems to be too low. We have seen Jordan Love now rush the ball, in every single game thus far. Now, last week against Detroit, only -2 rush yards. Detroit got after him. It was a short week. I've mentioned this a bunch. I didn't really expect that much from the Packers, and it was very encouraging to see him still have a good fantasy day. And I wonder what fantasy scoreline we're going to get from him. But the one I want to call out is going to be passing yard. If you were to include, and I could be wrong about this is based off of what I didn't look this. I probably should. And I apologize if it's wrong, but I believe if you include passing penalty yards in there as well, at the current line that we're getting, he would have hit it all 4 games. But the fact of the matter is he's hit it 3 straight games. And if you look at the opponents, like the last 2 weeks, Detroit and New Orleans, you'd be more worried about. And so this line of 237.5 for him to have hit it over the past 3 out of 4 games, that's highly intriguing to me. Tack on the fact that he gets his best receiver back playing a full allotment of snaps, and even his best running back most likely playing more snaps. They basically had a mini bye week by playing on Thursday and now playing on Monday. Then we tack on the matchup with the Las Vegas Raiders, and that's going to be an appealing one there as well. The only worry is that they might not need them to throw because maybe they're just going to be rushing the football. The Raiders haven't been that good at stopping opposing running backs as well. All in all, this is a pretty good matchup for a Green Bay Packers offense that, besides the linemen, are going to be, and maybe Luke Musgrave, are going to be the most healthy they've been all season. They're getting arguably their 2 best offensive weapons back in Watson and Aaron Jones, besides Jordan Love. And so, yeah, this one seems to be like a pretty darn good bet. The only worry would be is if Aaron Jones really lights it up. Now, I want to call out as well that I find the difference in receiving yards between Jordan Love and between Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs to be kind of a funny one. Okay, let's go ahead and point out why. So I mentioned on last Thursday that I was expecting Christian Watson to play basically the same amount of snaps as Romeo Doubs played in week 1. They both were nursing hamstring injuries. Teams tend to treat hamstring injuries the same. Specific teams will do that. And so it wasn't shocking to see that basically happen 45, 48. And the difference in that was probably like 1 snap, So with the mini bye week, I think we're actually going to see closer to like 80% of the snaps there for Christian Watson. If you guys were watching that game, you really didn't see him be limited that much. And so to me, if we're getting him, playing receiver number 1 snaps like I expect, this line that we're getting that is probably based mostly on him not playing a full allotment of snaps just seems to be way too low, right? I feel like that's pretty easy to see. And if you look at from like Dallas on, which was pretty much when he was healthy and playing a full allotment of snaps, you guys recall last year I called him as like an elite, I believe it was a showdown slate, but I called him out as like a core play that week in regards, I think it was a showdown slate, but I'm like, we need to be rostering Christian Watson, who was low owned, went off, pretty awesome call. But we look at the game log from that point on, only 1 game against Minnesota in which he would not have gone that over receiving yards. And so this feels like a taco, honestly. Like it should hit, and I kind of expect it to get bumped up. It's just weird kind of the lines that we've been getting on the Packers. So those 2 I really like. Then I want to call it another one before I get into the EV bets as well. Another line that I expect to pop up more and more throughout the week is going to be Zach Wilson. So I want to call out that like CJ Stroud in week 1, I mentioned that in like week 2 and week 3, Zach Wilson had actually kind of looked sharp, like with his throat. And for me, I felt like Zach Wilson was not being put in the correct situations to be successful. Now, yes, he was missing a bunch of reads and whatnot, but that seemed like coaching to me. And so in the second half against New England, it kind of seemed like they had figured out what their issues were. And then against KC, it definitely seemed like they had that figured out what their issues were. He looked good. And he's, sadly for them, I would say, he's kind of been their best offensive player the last 3 weeks, which kind of tells you everything you need to know about the Jets. Some people might take that as a hot take, but I want to call out something like Justin Fields, who really has been terrible. And I feel like this is a good comparison because against the Chiefs, he only had 99 receiving or passing yards. Against Denver, he had 335 passing yards. Now, whether you think Wilson is better than Justin Fields or not, I kind of tend to think he is. That is just like too good of a matchup for me to pass up on. And it's no shock. Like, guys, he played 3 of the toughest defenses in week 1, and the first like sort of good matchup he had a good game against. Like, that shouldn't be too shocking. You know, it's 2023. We know to really be attacking matchups a lot of the time. And to me, this low line that we're getting is one that I don't think we should be passing up on. And now this isn't going to be the best example, but if we just go ahead and look at other teams that have played Denver as well, let's go look at those players. Tua, 300. Sam Howell, nearly 300, who I think very similarly struggled against Buffalo. And then Jimmy G as well, who similarly struggled against Buffalo, but had a pretty good game against Denver. That was a low scoring game, a little bit more of a time possession game. He was 20 for 26, would have just missed out on the over of 202.5. Those 3 props that I called out, I think are all going to rise up throughout the week. And now let's just go ahead and get into the typical start of this video. I just want to call those 3. I felt like they're good, but I've spent enough time on them. Looking at it, we do have another London game. It's going to be close between Jacksonville and Buffalo. That's kind of an interesting one. We'll see if there are any props for that. The Falcons versus Houston game is going to be one that stays close, so a little bit more predictable, I would say, in terms of props we want to be on. For Detroit, they are 10-point favorites again, or 10.5-point favorites against Carolina. Maybe we can get some rushing props, rushing attempts props maybe for David Montgomery. I think that would be an interesting one that would correlate with how the game's going to go. Another close game is going to be Tennessee versus Indianapolis. That should kind of be a very interesting game. I already mentioned that I like Ryan Tannehill for over passing yards. That has already kind of come and went. Still, I think it's a little bit too low. We'll see if that one pops up. One game that's looking like we should maybe stay away from. I'm very curious as to what the running back situation is going to end up looking like here. I still expect Mostert to start in this game and HN to mix in there, but I do think it's going to be like a 50-50 split, maybe even a 40-20 split with whoever else would be there. So that might be a more difficult one. Very interested to see kind of what Wendell Robinson's receptions props is at. That was one that we hammered home, or I guess I hammered it home. I kind of mentioned that on the Thursday props video that he was someone that I liked. Hopefully you guys were able to take advantage of that. From there, Saints versus Patriots. This is probably going to be an ugly game. Probably one that we don't want to be touching any props until the Patriots start to get Demario Douglas more involved. I'm going to hammer that home until it happens. It's frustrating there. The Saints really didn't look good last week as well. Both offenses struggling. Another low-scoring game between the Ravens and Steelers. We'll see if there's any that pop up there. A lot of these other games are kind of ugly. Like, really, it becomes Jets, Broncos. Maybe we'll get something there. Vikings versus Minnesota. We might get something there that we like. And then these other games I'll be touching on in a separate video. So I feel like I have a good sense of maybe where I want to be attacking these slates. Let's go ahead and see if the prop bets that we're currently getting are going to correlate with those thoughts. All right, guys, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sort by all the games that aren't starting today. So I'm just going to take off the Thursday night game and also the Monday night game. So one prop bet that's really popping up right now is going to be Desmond Ritter for under 1 passing touchdown. This, to me, is pretty much being valued as a push currently. Say you like those 3 props that I mentioned and you want to get another one in there. You could toss in Desmond Ritter for under passing touchdowns. Derek Carr, this one's interesting as well. We can see heavily favored to get under 1.5 passing touchdowns. But once again, this is pretty much being valued as a strong push likelihood, I would say. Definitely one you could use if you wanted to, once again, get a push and maybe get one that's favoring for you. And then from there, Joshua Doubs, basically the exact same thing. So, yeah, if you want to roll with those passing touchdowns ones, I'm kind of fine with it. They went 2 for 3 last week. Then let's take a peek. The next best one that we got is going going to be Deebo Samuel for over 50.5 receiving yards. We can see the average sportsbook line has it set at 55. We can see the projection data has it set at 53.4. So all in all, yeah, it does seem like we're getting a slight edge there. Now, I find this game to be fascinating. I do want to touch on this, but I'll be touching on this a little bit more on the Sunday night video. So I just went ahead and took those off. James Cook. This is also kind of a fascinating one as well. James Cook last week had really a long reception that most weeks is not going to be there. It was kind of just a play that Josh Allen made on his feet by extending the play. And like most weeks, that's just not going to occur. It's a very fluky play. Okay. He ends up getting only one target in that game as well on that catch. That's the concern there. And so the line that we're getting for him, 15.5, I would say is probably correct. I don't know if I exactly want to chase that. Now, it is worth calling out that was his lowest target total thus far. And he has looked kind of a little bit better each and every game. And the matchup that they have this week is basically just a push matchup in terms of receiving yards to opposing running backs. So I don't know if I really want to be targeting that one. We'll go ahead and take a peek real quickly at the snaps as well. James Cook didn't get that many snaps. It's kind of a blowout towards the end of the game, but we're seeing his snaps capped at about 60% as well. So it does feel a little bit more like a game script one as well. I don't expect the Bills to be playing from behind, so I don't expect James Cook to be getting that many receiving yards. That to me is probably going to be a stay away. This one with Juju, I think 27.5 is his receiving yards over and under. And the toughest part about the New England Patriots is that they like their old, washed up veterans. And it kind of sounds weird to say with Juju, but man, they need to not give him the snaps. It's not working. They've been running out a lot of 2 tight end sets, a lot of 12 personnel there, which kind of working, kind of not. Sadly, I know it's a little bit more because of situations in the games, but Zeke has actually looked a little bit better than Stevenson as well. They need to find a way to start passing the ball more. And I know the game was a blowout, and that's why some of these snap counts are lower in week 4 and whatnot. But eventually, Demario Douglas is going to take over the snaps for Juju Smith-Schuster. And we just see the log. We can see again a decent amount of targets. That's the worries that he has been getting targeted heavily. Not exactly the best matchup against the Saints. And I do expect him to just continue to struggle, and I expect those snaps to continue to dwindle down for him. From there, passing touchdowns again, I don't really want to touch on those. I do find this line for Courtland Sutton to be kind of an interesting one as well. Let's go ahead and talk about just Denver in general. So finally, we are getting very similar lines for both Jerry Jeudy and also Courtland Sutton. Jerry Jeudy going to be much more of a downfield threat, whereas Courtland Sutton going to be much more of a possession receiver. Now, the issue that I have is that this is going to be a difficult matchup going against the Jets. And so it's almost like a situation where if we're betting one of these, like Courtland Sutton, like the data is telling us maybe we want to bet Courtland Sutton for under 47.5 receiving yards, then we might as well just probably bet the other ones as unders as well, like Russell Wilson, Jerry Jeudy, as well as Courtland Sutton. Another one that is definitely interesting is going to be Dallas Goedert for over receiving yards. This is one in which you just expect him to eventually have a much better game. And now part of the reason why he hasn't is they really just haven't needed him to get that ball that much in the passing game. Now, it is worth calling out that really when we look at like DVP for tight ends, he's actually faced 2 of the more difficult teams in terms of tight end production between the Washington Commanders and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. If we look at the Cardinals, have actually been pretty good against opposing tight ends as well. Now, Denver, he should have had probably a better game against, but then again, it was Minnesota. Minnesota and New England. Let's see it. Let's see those. So yes, New England pretty good against opposing tight ends. And then the Vikings, middle of the road. Okay. Now we look at the Rams. This is by far going to be his best matchup for opposing tight ends. And so if he continues to get these targets that he has been getting, at least against Tampa and Minnesota, which you kind of expect to occur, the issue with this offense is now with DeAndre Swift there seems to be a little bit too many mouths to feed almost. But at the same time, this is going to be a matchup that they can attack. And a lot of people are probably going to look at the trends and say, I'm betting the under. I would say that's probably wrong. I actually don't mind the over here. Then from there, just trying to find some more prop bets that I like that might be standing out data-wise. As we can see, pretty much the lines that we're getting are all going to be pretty tight from this point on. So it's more or less going to be trying to find slight edges here or there. You guys, I do want to remind you, I will be coming out with like a Saturday video as well. That's going to feature some more fantasy score props. I feel like that is where we can get a pretty big edge. I've mentioned this. The last 4 weeks, we've had Jordan Love as like one of the best fantasy score props, and they've basically been free squares, 57% or so likelihood to hit each time. So make sure to tune into those or to that video. So I do want to call out just two interesting lines that I saw. So Miles Sanders and Chuba Hubbard, we can see about a 13-yard difference there for them in rushing yards. And why I find that to be interesting is when we look at their snap counts, they really haven't been too different, especially last week. Now, Miles Sanders is nursing a hamstring injury, but at the same time, that it really didn't seem to come across on film like he was nursing a hamstring injury. That just seems to be something like precautionary that they're going to keep popping up in there. So it'll be very interesting. This is kind of risky because you are betting on the snaps. And also Detroit really hasn't been a pushover, especially in terms of rushing yards given up to opposing running backs. So that's the worry here. But 27.5 rushing yards is very low. And so we could see, maybe we bet the under for Miles Sanders if that trend continues. And then we could potentially bet the over for Chuba Hubbard if he does get a little bit more work. We're more or less betting on him getting 10 rushing attempts in this game. That was just an interesting one that stood out. I'm not saying you need to place that bet, but I do think there is some correlation there. Guys, this one I do find to be fascinating as well. If the Cincinnati Bengals offense continues to struggle and the Cardinals continue to look as good as they have, partially due because James Conner's looking good, I actually don't mind the idea of over 59.5 rush yards as well. Very tight, like we're not getting a big edge here. But Conner is someone last week that they weren't able to give him a lot of rushing attempts, even though he looked good doing it. The game just got out of hand pretty fast going against San Francisco. That makes sense. So if this game does stay close, I know Cincinnati's defense has been very good. If we look at the DVP as well, let's see how they rank out against the run. Actually not that good in terms of rushing yards given up. So I might like this a little bit more. Now, obviously these other ones that I'm calling out, guys, that weren't the best EV bets, you could just bet these on any sports book. Okay, I want to make that clear. So I don't know, James Conner continues to look good, and so if he does get more than that 11 rushing attempts, man, that's kind of an intriguing line, I would say. Now, another kind of line that I think is going to be interesting is the line that we're getting for Dalton Kincaid. Just given the matchup, Evan Ingram had himself a pretty good game. Jonnu Smith had himself a pretty good game against the Jacksonville Jaguars last week, and we can see in terms of DVP, the Jaguars have given up a decent amount of production to opposing tight end. Now we need to look at the snap count usage to really determine how good of a one this is, but we can see Kincaid, as long as the game stays close enough for long enough, should be a decent one. The issue the last couple of weeks is that the games have been blowouts and he hasn't really needed to get those receiving yards because, well, they've just been running out the clock pretty much. They've been rushing the football a little bit more. And so as long as this line here at 5.5 is accurate, it's not a blowout, then Kincaid, and I hate PrizePicks that does this. We need to go to DraftKings just to show the game long. Like, we can see that if he does play a little bit more snaps here, again, playing like 60 to 70, then this line that we're getting does seem to be a little bit too low because it just takes one more reception in 2 games for him to get that over. Instead of 1 out of 4 games, it'd be 3 out of 4 games. Now, I know against the Jets, he did play a full snap share that you would expect 70% of the snaps, but that's a much difficult matchup. And same thing with Washington. I already mentioned that earlier. Very good against opposing tight ends. So Jacksonville that struggles, that's a weakness that I expect them to attack. Now, I'm probably reading into this one a little bit too much as well. But you look at where Jacksonville was successful last week, it was more on Christian Kirk type route. I would say Tank Dell is closer to Christian Kirk than he is like Calvin Ridley. And so it wouldn't be shocking for him to have a better game in this game. And like I mentioned last week, I thought Nico Collins would be the better option in terms of receiving yards and everything. That occurred. I don't think there should be that big of a yardage difference. It really just is by how they choose to attack this defense. I would say it's going to be more with Tank Dell rather than, I shouldn't say more, but Tank Dell should get a little bit more work in this game than he did last week. Then from there, I do want to call out Wan'Dale Robinson as well. He was someone that I mentioned for the Monday night stuff. We weren't getting any props on him when I was talking about him, but I'm like, he is going to be someone that does get a lot more snaps. He's probably their best offensive playmaker with Saquon Barkley out. Both of those held up to be true. They got him heavily involved. And when we look at the snaps here, they actually jumped up a little bit more than I expected. It went from 21 to 63. Okay, I was probably expecting like 55%. And so let's say that gets a little bit higher. Like Darius Slayton's been playing 80% of the snaps, almost 90. If that occurs, and let's say he even gets like 75% of the snaps, that line that we're getting for him just seems too low. Like they're going to manufacture touches to him, and I'm hoping that we get a receiving prop. Like if the line is set at 4, that'd be ideal because I think it'd be a push, like valued as a push, but chances are he probably would get another catch if he is playing a little bit more snaps there. And so I don't mind the over receiving yards. Does get a pretty good matchup against Miami. Obviously, the matchup against Seattle was one that we liked as well. It's not a terrible one. I feel like a lot of people are going to chase this one with Michael Wilson as well. I personally felt like he got more hype last week than he should have, whereas like previous weeks, people probably were sleeping on him a little bit too much. Now we see the snap counts, like they have been there. Strangely enough, he had more snaps in week 1 compared to any other week. Maybe that was a weakness that they saw. And when I was watching this film, like he really wasn't someone that was like popping up. It was really Marquise Brown, James Conner, even Zach Ertz. Now he did make 2 big plays in it. Don't get me wrong, but like I'm watching and like besides the touchdowns, really it was really focal point to Marquise Brown. That being said, he does continue to make plays. And if he is going to be playing about 70% of the snaps, and it is an ugly matchup again, I don't want to load up too much on the Cardinals, but maybe not a terrible one. Like he could get that in 1, maybe 2 catches. All right, so here are going to be my favorite bets thus far. I already mentioned these 3 guys. By all means, I like them. The only issue that I have is that on Underdog, much better bet when we're betting a 3-slip bet. Where on PrizePicks, we're getting a 1, it's 5x instead of 6x. So much better bet, I would say, on Underdog there with those 3. If I had to choose, like this would be the cutoff. I like those 3 a lot. Then these next ones are ones that I personally like as well. Dalton Kincaid for over receiving yards. I already mentioned the reasons why. One of the best EV bets that we have available on the slate is going to be Desmond Ritter for under 1 passing touchdown. There were some other ones that, you could do there as well. I think this one's going to be the best option. And then Juju for under 27.5 receiving yards. Don't love that one. That'd probably be the one I would take off if I was going to take one off. And for what it's worth, guys, these 3 that we have here, I feel like they're going to be good fantasy score props as well. So, make your best judgment there if and when those fantasy score props become available. Now that's going to be all for this video. Just want to remind you guys, if you want access to that cheat sheet, it is available for just $10 a month. 9to5sports.com. Sign up there. If you guys want access to the ODDSJAM Sportsbook View, that's also click the link in the description below. Use the promo code 9to5 to get 25% off your deposit. That's going to be all for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed the coverage. If you did, make sure to give a like and subscribe.